And some of the examples of the projects that were entertained, you probably will think this man is a skillful manipulator of information and he makes it all sound so easy. No, you can check it yourself. You can check if you are persistent enough on the websites, for example, and find out that the government of Kuwait requested $111 million in one project. It was a small project, $111 million. And the UN Compensation Commission in Geneva decided, no, not 111, but $177 million. In other words, you have a small car accident, you have a bill from your repair shop for 2,000 Canadian dollars, you hand it in to your insurance company, and the insurance company writes back to you and say, "Dear Mrs. Miller, we are sorry you had the accident. The bill for 2,000, we pay you 3,200. I don't think you'll get such a letter. And the Kuwait received 177 while they expected $111 million. There are many other details, absolutely accurate, researched and verified details that show you in what dilemma the Iraqi people lived. I could give you now a slate of statistics. I will not do that. But I will try to tell you about the 51-cent scandal, because all that came into Iraq under the Oil for Food program was on a per capita, per person, per day basis less than a bagel or a cup of coffee. 51 cents per day. For what? For food, for medicine, for water, for sanitation, for electricity, for agriculture, for education. Education was always the poor child on the block. There was always practically no money left, and it was the last sector that was considered in our negotiations with the government of Iraq for the Oil for Food program, because the other things had more survival value in the short term, food and medicine, of course. So the 51 cents is all that they had. There was no work, there were no taxpayers, and the majority of the Iraqi people had to live on that amount. A school teacher earned between $3 and $5, between, let's say, 8 and 10,000 dinar, and 4 oranges at the street corner near where I lived were 1,000 dinar. No normal Iraqi could buy 4 oranges. But the United Nations, we could buy, and we stopped, and we could buy, and we could have we could enjoy bananas, we could enjoy kiwi, which were imported. It was all there, but only for a very small group of people. And then, you know, it was called humanitarian supplies. I was called the Humanitarian Coordinator. What was there humanitarian about it? When the money came, the 51 cents came from Iraqi money. This was all Iraqi money. There was not one penny of international money that was contributed to the Oil for Food program. It was entirely Oil for Food program, Iraqi oil revenue. That was the story. Well, there is so much more. I will skip over some of this, but I want to say there were many gruesome stories also of how the United Nations was misused. Let me give you one example here. You have read in the press that the Secretary General's offices were bugged in New York. You read that because Claire Short, the minister in London at the time, this was 2.5 years ago, publicly stated this, that the British intelligence had bugged the Secretary General's floor, and he was asked about it, and he said, well, why did they go through all this? They could have come directly to me. I would have told them the same story, because I have nothing to hide. So there was this nasty awareness that not even the United Nations was protected from the misuse by intelligence services. My office in Baghdad was bugged by everybody. It was bugged by the Iraqis, of course. It was bugged by Israeli Mossad, by CIA, by all kinds. I didn't realize until much later that the little cameras in the corners in our staircases, that they didn't just link us walking up to the disarmament group that was in the same building as we were, but it was linked to Bahrain and to Washington. If you wanted to call me from Canada, the number you would dial was a New York number. It was a 212 number. You would dial that number and you would get me in Baghdad. It shows you how we were all linked into a mesh of legal and less legal operations. The worst example that I had in Baghdad about misuse of the United Nations was when, in my days, 800 ambulances were ready to be shipped into Iraq, and I was told that these 800 ambulances cannot be shipped to Iraq, even though they were badly needed, because they had telephones in them. Now, which ambulance in Canada doesn't have a telephone? You need a telephone to communicate with the doctors in life-threatening cases. So we decided reluctantly they can be removed, and the ambulances arrived in Iraq. I had no ambulances for my staff. We were 500 international staff. We had no ambulance. But the disarmament group of the United Nations had ambulances. And I pleaded with them. I was first told, no, you cannot use our ambulance. One flag, one United Nations. And then after some back and forth, I got agreement that we could use these. And then I found out that not only were there listening devices, but sophisticated, high-tech listening devices were in the ambulances. So we were forced to take simple telephones out of the ambulances for use by Iraqis, but in our UN ambulances were listening devices. Now that is shameful, and that is so bad that the UN is being misused. Listening devices in New York, listening devices in ambulances. The UN cannot meet your expectations if we are subjected to this kind of bilateral pressure from some sources, some countries. The sanction plus, the dot on the I, were the no-fly zones. 2 zones that were established in northern and southern Iraq, allegedly to protect Kurds and Shias in the north and the south. That was all right. The Kurdish population in northern Iraq liked this afternoon flight of a jet that came over and went through the sound barrier to make really a noise and reassure everyone they were there to observe. This was a benign violation of international law, because it was against the law. There was no UN resolution to sanction these no-fly zones. But then it became progressively aggressive, particularly after Operation Desert Fox in December of 1998, when the 2 air forces of the UK and the US were allowed to operate under enlarged rules of engagement. That's when the number of civilian casualties increased, when it became nasty, and when it became, in the year 2002, it was a pretext for preparing for this war. But it was such an unfair way of operating. It was like 2 boxers. You tell one boxer not to move, the other boxer is allowed to punch you, and when you start bleeding and you are weak, then they stop and they say now, in terms of further frightening. There was something called the siren stories about where children what this would cling to their mothers when they would hear the sirens announcing that there was another overflight in the no-fly zone. So there was another area here where things went badly against what the United Nations stand for.